Hello, everyone. I'm Ross from Hive, and this is Simon, Hive's Chartered Tax Advisor.
Hello.
We're here today to produce this video on building wealth and some of the complementary aspects that dovetail into that. So there's a couple of aspects that we're going to talk about today. One is some of the recent trends that we've seen in wealth management structure, and how that can actually achieve you a guaranteed 30% improvement on your position. I know it's a bold claim, but we'll elaborate that later. Fairly straightforward, actually. I think the other kind of the other important part to building your wealth is the components of tax efficiency. I think there's a very important aspect that you need to appreciate, which is the behavioural shift that you need to take in stewarding your wealth. And I think another part is also how we thoroughly believe that to get the best results, you need to pull your advisors together and get them work cohesively. There's just no merit in your advisors working in isolation and the disefficiencies of operating in a silo. Mm-hmm. So, Simon, I suppose I'll start with your aspect. What trends have you seen recently then towards wealth management?
Actually, I think we've seen over the last few years, there's been a big shift to the way people are managing their wealth themselves. A lot of people are taking advantage of tax rules around companies and dividends and the flexibility that gives you. You could incorporate your business, which many people have. They did it in the past for reasons that suited them in the past, but they're finding extra advantages there now in the flexibility that gives you. A lot of people are using their incorporated entity to restructure their personal affairs and minimize their extractions from the company. That almost immediately gives you a tax saving, and there's extra wealth there in the company that the company can invest. We're seeing a lot of that. One thing that is actually becoming more and more apparent is it's not about the big buck savings these days. It's about grabbing the percentages, and the percentages do all add up.
I think in the past that there's always the kind of stereotypical assumption that you could fund your pension and it was massively tax efficient.
Yeah, pension limits constantly changing. I think the government wanted to encourage pension investment, and then everybody invested too much in pensions, so the government restricted it again. And actually, companies now can be your pension. You can use companies as a place to store wealth, to store cash, to invest in assets. I'm sure you'll come on to.
So it's not technically a pension, I suppose, is what you're saying.
No. So it's not legally a pension, but it is a pot that you can save for the future to draw from, or to liquidate, or to pass to the next generation when tax rates are, because you're no longer earning as a dentist or whatever industry you are in, you've got more scope within your personal tax world to extract it when there's no other income coming in.
You're kind of buying yourself options in a way. It's
Yeah, companies will always be more flexible, and even with a company, you can invest in your pension using your company. We've got self-invested pensions now, which again I think we'll probably come on to in a bit.
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose I'm just trying to really kind of drive home that pension thing. It's a bit of a proxy for a pension, but you've got utter kind of control over it, I suppose, is what you're saying, because you're director of that company.
Yeah, there's a mechanism becoming more and more popular, although still I would say in the minority. There is a mechanism of setting up a company that holds all your assets and is outside of your estate for inheritance tax purposes, but you retain complete control of it. So they're not your assets, but you're in control of those assets, and they are there for the next generation, or for you to liquidate when you need to, or should you wish to.
So just probably another great example of the maximum flexibility you can get.
Yeah.
Set it up correctly.
Yeah.
So can someone draw down cash if they wanted to still, though?
Yes, yeah. So if you set it up properly, you've got access to those assets to control them. So you control whether the company spends its cash on buying a property, possibly. You also control whether the company pays you some cash. So you've still got your income from your company whilst you need it. Family members can have an income from that company, but it is growing its asset value outside of your inheritance tax.
And also 30% higher than...
Yes, because you've not suffered tax extracting cash to buy a rental property. Your company's bought it, you've immediately got 30% more to spend.
Can you just elaborate why though?
Yeah, so if you have your eyes on a property, you might have cash in your company. You can extract that cash so that it becomes your cash. The government will take 30% of that as tax on dividend, possibly more. Yeah, and rates are only going to go up, I think, in the coming years. So minimum 30%. Government's got its slice. You then have a pot of cash after tax, which you can buy a property with. Actually, if you direct your company to purchase that property for you, the government doesn't get its slice of tax there. So you've immediately got 30% more to spend.
Think of the compound effect that might have if you're talking about maybe not property as such, because you're very much reliant on the property market, but if you've got that in a long-term growing asset, whether it's stocks or shares or even a savings account, the compound effect of that extra 30% at the start is probably massive, isn't it?
It is, yeah. We've worked with a client recently to do similar. So they've extracted cash from their trading entity, excess cash from their trading entity, into a company that is set up in such a way that it's building asset value separate from the trading company, but still in a company, and that structure's put in place tax-free. So there's no tax wastage there. And they're building it up towards £1 million, and they're working with our IFA partners to maximise their investments there.
Wow, sounds good. I mean, that could be worth tens, hundreds of thousands, I suppose, over the lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I suppose there is an element here, though. If we're seeing this trend occurring of people accumulating cash in their limited company, it does have to be in a limited company, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't. I mean, the flexibility isn't there outside of the company. You're immediately exposed to tax on profits outside of the company. And companies do pay tax on profits, but they pay tax on profits at a lower rate. And then you have the option to not expose yourself to the higher rate of tax, the 30% additional dividend tax. That option just isn't an option outside of a company. So the first step is to incorporate.
Do you think that, well, I mean, it's probably a bit of a rabbit hole here now, but do you think that anything, a tax rate's going to change? You alluded to them kind of going upwards.
I think with the cost of COVID, and we talked about this before, government borrowing and spending this year has been insane. It's got to be paid for, and it will be paid for with tax. So yeah, tax rises are coming. We don't know what. I say we don't know when. There's a budget in October, we think. So I would be surprised if we don't start seeing some radical changes.
Do you think the your structures and suggestions, will that shield you against some of this exposure?
Yes, I think companies are always going to be more flexible. So you're always going to have that opportunity to control your personal expenditure, your company extractions. I mean, just to give you one example, we had a client who incorporated. They got their personal expenditure down to a level where their husband and wife had 100k available to spend every year, with a tax exposure of about 7k between them. They managed to cap their spending to that level by shifting things to the company, using existing rules. So it's small things that add up, from mobile phones at 50 quid a month to insurances at hundreds of pounds a month to cars at hundreds of pounds a month. And across a year, and across a husband and a wife and everything they've got going on in their life, it all adds up, and it shields you. Because tax rises will come in two phases. There will be some tax rises in the company, probably, but that's a rise on a smaller rate. And then the dividend tax rates might go up as well. So you might even find yourself even more shielded than you think you might do if the dividend rates go up. I think there might be national insurance coming on dividends. So not having dividends protects you from that increase.
Wow. Okay. I think a lot of one of the main contentions I often hear is, okay, well, I'm not going to pay the 32.5% tax now, but I'll have to pay it in the future, won't I? Is that fair, or?
Not necessarily. No, I don't think that's not a blanket rule. The company can be passed down through the next generation, and then they've still got access to a cash income, regular cash income each month that is protected. It's a shift in mindset for people, but we are seeing a lot of it now. The tax rates have gone up. It's not about owning things yourself. It's about having control of things that something else owns for you.
There's a great quote by Rockefeller who said, own nothing and control everything.
Yeah, I mean, the very wealthy individuals around the world have been doing it this way for years, but I think
this is just an accessible way.
Things have changed. Tax rules have changed. People's views have changed, and rules and all have changed, and people are starting to look at other mechanisms. That other mechanisms have become more viable for people of kind of medium wealth level, rather than the billionaires of the world, the Bernie Ecclestons, who've never owned anything probably for about 50 years.
I think there's one other aspect of limited companies which some people may or may not be aware of, I suppose, but that they are publicly available, aren't they?
Yeah, so every limited company has a record at Companies House, a public record, which shows information about the accounts, including what most people or many people don't realise: cash reserves and asset value. So there's no information on what the assets might be for most companies. Most companies are small companies, so they don't present a profit and loss in a detailed set of accounts, but they do present a balance sheet with cash balances on it. And for a number of reasons, people might like to hide that and not have that information publicly available. And we are familiar with and have implemented a perfectly normal but relatively unknown mechanism to have a company that doesn't need to put its accounts on Companies House. And you can couple that with the structure of having control of the assets but not ownership of the assets to grow everything outside of inheritance tax, free of dividend tax, and privately.
So you can kind of operate your trading company and
yep, absolutely.
Redivert the wealth to your...
Yeah, the trading company will always be public. There's a number of reasons why that has to be, that probably on the scope of what we're talking about now, but an asset company is very well suited to this particular structure that we're starting to see more and more of. And
you're just saying it kind of just shields information.
Yeah. So it's still within the same rules of how companies are governed and run and taxed. It's still corporation tax. It's still dividend tax, etc., etc. It's just protected.
So it's a bit of a case of having the right tool for the right job.
Yep.
Your trading company will be your trading, but you might choose to set up a separate structure to build your asset, your wealth, and for intergenerational needs and control extractions like Rockefeller would do. And wow, okay. Sounds fantastic. I think that probably leads on quite nicely to probably the secondary tone of what we wanted to talk about today, and I think that's very much about a behavioural shift. And probably a great way to example this. I've got a lovely client who has been a good friend for a number of years, and we had a discussion a little while ago, and we were looking at, because he's got a one of these kind of investment companies that you're talking about, Simon. It's a bit of a mixture of property, bit of a mixture of cash and other assets. And actually, when we recounted our maths, as we were reflecting on what was going on, and he had probably sort of a couple million quid's worth of equity there, combination of property and other liquid assets as we're talking about. And it kind of came to me like an epiphany, because we were talking about, because he spent so much time in practice, and all the challenges that you get in practice, dealing with patients, dealing with staff, dealing with administration, dealing with regulation, and we diverted our gaze to the side, and we realised he's always had this kind of asset company, and actually, it did have 2 million quid in it, and we've been somewhat neglecting it. It's as if he had an asset manager role. It's probably a bit of a phrase you might hear in the city, but he did have an asset manager role, and he just been neglecting that part of his job. He'd been so busy, so distracted by running his dental practice. He'd just kind of left that portion of his world over there, and properties can kind of bumble along. You have an agent managing them. I think a lot of people have a propensity to leave their IFA, manage their stocks and shares and their pension as well. If they've got a large pension they've built up whilst the tax rules allowed them to do so, there's almost this kind of abdication of responsibility, and it's easy to kind of blame the IFA when your value of your stocks go down. But I think fundamentally what I wanted to portray is, well, I suppose if they're your assets, then they are your responsibility. And if you do have a pot at which you're building over the years, or whether you've sold your practice and liquidated some cash, that is fundamentally your responsibility there to steward it and to fulfill that asset manager role, which you've probably not turned up for that day job for any number of years.
And what kind of assets are you talking about then? You've mentioned property and stocks and shares, and obviously there's cash, but can companies and these asset vehicles have other assets?
Principally, there's only a finite number of asset classes, and I can't tell you where to deploy your cash, clearly. I think you have to have an emotional connection with each one and fully investigate it and find out. I know people who love property, and I know people who can't stand their buy-to-let property. It's just a pain in the backside. So, there's only a finite number of asset classes, in my opinion. There's cash and cash equivalents, so money in the savings account and really liquefiable stuff. There's property, stocks and shares. There's bonds, which are effectively just loans, but loans to at a corporate level. There's probably also a class that includes sort of commodities and precious metals. There's also probably the most obvious one. We often kind of hear people say, "Well, my dental practice is my pension." Well, your own trading business is an asset which you're choosing to invest in, and we've often kind of said that, every single day you're choosing to buy your own practice. It's probably a topic of conversation for another day, but, often your dental practice can be worth, £1 million. Well,
yeah, I suppose when you say stocks and shares, people think about maybe buying part of Apple or something, or Tesco shares or whatever, Tesco PLC, but actually your trading company is stocks and shares as well.
It kind of is. Arguably the returns are bigger, and the investment is larger as well, the emotion and everything you put in. But it's a very definite class in its own right, and we've seen people the prices in dentistry are still very buoyant. So
there's a lot of I'm aware that there was a lot of movement in the dental market kind of pre-COVID, but are you still seeing practices buying and selling?
Very definitely is the answer. I think the market's probably polarized quite a bit. So those dental practices who have strong business fundamentals in place, who have marketing systems, who are profitable after paying the principal, they're desirable assets at this point in time. So again, it kind of, if we step it back, it boils down to what you're choosing to do with your cash. And you might decide, actually, no, I absolutely don't want to buy a dental practice at this point in time. It's the worst idea in the world. I'd much rather put it somewhere else. it's kind of not for me to make the decision. I think there's ways that we can help and steer and nurture people decide, but fundamentally there's these primary asset classes. And probably the last one I haven't mentioned, it's arguably a class in its own right, is cryptocurrency as well, on which we've got a few clients we're investing in, and it's certainly quite an extreme part of the market, but it's part of your asset manager role. You do need to decide where you need to deploy your energies and your hard-earned cash. So there's a number of kind of sub layers under each one. You take property, you can invest in commercial property, buy to let property, you can buy a plot and build a house on it. You do need to kind of shoulder that yourself and decide. There's no way on earth you can abdicate that decision making, because
are there any tools to help with that decision making? How does somebody decide, other than a feeling of I do or don't like property? How can they decide how to invest, where to invest?
Well, I think there's ways that we can help steer and nurture people, and when we're talking about a dental practice, for example, there's certainly ways that our business development department can help them nurture and decide whether it fits in with their objectives in the world. So you can make it objective and help them ascertain whether logically they're going to achieve the rate of return they want to. But it all dovetails together, and this is where your constituent advisors will need to work together, because if you've got a 5-year window towards retirement, for example, then clearly that closes down some options. But if you've got a 20-year horizon, then it might be that other options are available to you. So it's about getting the right people in the room together and making sure they're actually kind of talking. Everyone's got their own agenda in life, and you need to take a bit of an overview, I suppose, as to ascertain, okay, well, that dovetails with that in the right way. So I suppose that's how we aim to help our clients and our prospective dental clients, is to help them dovetail together respective efforts and the respective experts in the right way, so they're getting the right advice at the right time for the tangible outcomes that each client sets. So in that sense, if you do want to explore this part, or if there's anything else that's piqued your interest today, with perhaps with Simon and his structures, or if you want to develop your wealth building strategies a little bit further, please do get in contact. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.